All right, so I think we've had the majority of our attendees jump in. I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Karen Hoffman to introduce our guest speaker today. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Amanda. Great joining you today. And hello, students and faculty at Art Center. It's good to be part of this event today. It's my absolute pleasure to be introducing Robert Brunner, founder and partner of Ammunition, a design studio dedicated to bringing products and services that matter to market. Their work is created by putting entrepreneurs in close contact with a team of designers with expertise in physical and digital product design, service design, brand identity, user experience, graphic design, and packaging. They work across those disciplines to transform great ideas into satisfying personal experiences that contribute to the business success of their clients. Some of you are probably familiar with Beats by Dre or the Ember mug as examples. And I think one of the most interesting recent projects has been the development of a nasal mister called Fend for everyday airway hygiene to naturally fight the transmission of germs. Prior to founding Ammunition, Robert was a partner at Pentagram and led strategic brand consulting and industrial design programs for Fortune 500 companies. Prior to that, he was the director of industrial design for Apple, where he established its pioneering internal corporate design organization, Apple IDG. Before coming to Apple, Robert co-founded design consultancy Lunar. Robert was named one of Fast Company's most creative people in business, and his work is included in the permanent design collections of the MoMA, both in New York and San Francisco. And he is the co-author of the book, Do You Matter? How Great Design Will Make People Love Your Company, which sits on my shelf. So thank you, Robert, for joining us today. We're really excited for you to share your story with our students. Thanks.
Great, pleasure. Well, let me get my slides up here. This is always a little tricky to get Keynote to play properly in Zoom, so hopefully it goes fine. So, all right, so you guys should see a black screen with our double M on it, I hope.
Yes, you're good.
Okay, good. We'll see how the transitions go, and I actually had some videos, but I took them out because it just always chokes for some reason. I got really great bandwidth here. So, I'm going to talk a lot about Ammunition and our work, but I'm going to start a little bit with my background and sort of this idea of being design driven, and what that means to me in my professional life, and how this has occurred. And I wrote this subtitle out, and it kind of freaked me out, like looking through the lens of 40 years of design, which is just absolutely freaks me out because I still think I'm about 26 years old, but that's probably what keeps me moving. But I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to start going way back with my upbringing and environment. And as you get a little older, you start to realize this stuff that happened to you when you were a kid actually was pretty impactful and had a lot to do with who you are today. So these are my parents. They're both no longer with us. My mom, Elizabeth Brunner, went by Betty, and Russ Brunner. So my mom was a really interesting woman. She started her career as a fashion model, then became a homemaker, but all the time she was an artist and a craftsperson. Later on, when I was in high school, she started her own children's clothing company, and she was just always making things, always doing things. And our home was pretty much entirely mid-century modern Danish furniture, which I always thought was really interesting when I'd go over to my friend's house, just it's our house, and I'd come back home and this, this at the time, which I didn't think much about, this sort of beautiful teak furniture everywhere. But, those things started to shape my judgments about what design was. Now, my father was an incredibly talented engineer. In fact, he created much of disk drive technology, original disk drive technology at IBM. But he also was a project junkie. I mean, there was always building something. He built a number of boats in our driveway. Everything was a project, right? So everything in our home was really sort of project driven, and that sort of really shaped who I am. And as I mentioned, my father he created the first Winchester disk drives at IBM, all the mechanical technology. In fact, if you do have something with a disk drive in it, there's still a piece of my dad in there. And he designed this approach to the head that flies above the disk, and it was patented by IBM and is still used today in literally every disk drive that's made. So I attended high school in lovely Sunnyvale, California, and upon getting near graduation, I did what most students do. I went to see the college career counselor, and he looked at my grades and my courses and said, "Well, let's see, you're good in math and science, so you're an engineer, right?" And my father's an engineer, so I thought, yeah, I'll do that. I'll go into engineering. So I went to San Jose State University and started studying engineering. What he didn't look at was where I really excelled in were my art classes and my shop classes, right? I had straight A's in anything that involved art or shop. So I spent about a year in engineering and really was dissatisfied with it. Just didn't feel like I was really exercising, my brain in the way that I wanted to. So I took this trip over to the art department one day. I thought I'd really rebel against my father. And I'd heard about this thing called graphic design, which, was sort of, I thought was commercial art. And I thought that might be cool. And I walked into the art building, and right inside the door was this display case full of industrial design artifacts, so renderings and models. And I stood there for a really long time, and I just, I thought, this is it, right? This is what I need to do. I always wonder what would happen if I went in a different door, right? Where I would have went, but I had no idea what industrial design was. Signed up, changed my major, and never looked back, and loved every minute of it. During school and shortly thereafter, as I began to study design and design out in the world, there were some designers that really shaped and influenced me. And these are four of them. In the upper left, Mario Bellini, to the right of him, Ettore Sottsass, Dieter Rams, and down in the lower right is Kenneth Grange. Bellini did this amazing, I saw him speak once, and it's this incredibly emotional presentation of work. Sottsass at the time was driving what became known as the Memphis movement, which really was sort of challenging a lot of modernism. Dieter Rams was, of course, the sort of pinnacle of modernism in terms of sensibility and purity of form and function. And then Kenneth really had this sort of blend of it all, right? And he did sort of beautiful, clean work, but there was a lot of personality and expression to it. So as I studied these people, I really began to form my own vocabulary. But I think, Mario Bellini was the most influential to me. And he had this approach to form that where it was very dynamic, right? Compiled a very simple forms, many times shapes and blocks and triangles, but done in a way that there was always movement to the object. There was always something happening. And the work, I show this slide as an Olivetti Logos mechanical calculator. The work he did for Olivetti in the late 70s and early 80s, in many ways, when you look back at it, it was absolutely clairvoyant in terms of design of technology, and incredibly influential to not just myself, but many designers practicing in Europe that were beginning to work in high technology. And I think you can look at, if you go back and look at the work, you can see roots of a lot of the things that you're experiencing and using every day today. So I started working at this company called GVO as an intern in Palo Alto. And GVO was at that time a fairly big office, like maybe 50 people. And I started as an intern working in the model shop, and was kind of stuck there. And it was a great experience building models, but I knew I could do more. So I befriended an engineer who was working on this project, but didn't have any design. It was an engineering project, but it was a hormone implanter for cattle for Syntex agribusiness. And literally on my own time, started working with him to design it, and without anybody's permission. And the leadership of the company saw what I was doing, and they're like, okay, well, hey, this guy who we're like paying $10 an hour can actually do something. So I managed to work my way into the project and ended up going to production and sort of cemented myself within the organization. it's actually, it's a foundation of one of my favorite sayings, which is don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. And I've used that a number of times in my career. So then at GVO, as I became a project designer, I handed this project for a startup company called Mindset. And this was a IBM PC compatible computer. You can go look up what that meant back in the 80s. But most of the machines hadn't really been designed. They were just sheet metal boxes. And so this was something we did in a very different way. It was a powerful graphics engine and was intended for creative use in gaming. And designed this product working very closely with the founders. And it ended up winning a number of awards and was put in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. I think I was at the time like 24 years old, right? Which was mind blowing. And but it really helped not only move my career forward, but helped, you know, the designing the product and solidifying a lot of the things that I'd studied and then been influenced by into form, and then moving that form into production was sort of a very important point in my career. So shortly after that, I began through a sequence of events doing work for Apple and on a few projects, sort of leading to some production products, and then worked on this program, which was the Macintosh LC. And at the time when I was working on it, I was actually recruited to become the director of industrial design, which was a really interesting experience. When they first asked me, I said no. Was really happy at Lunar, enjoyed what I was doing. And at that time, Apple was largely outsourcing industrial design first, of course, with Frog, and then a variety of consultants, including Lunar. And I didn't really want to do that. So I said no, and they went away and came back 3 months later and said, no, we really want you. What would you want? And I said, well, you know, I think that Apple, if any company could support a world-class design organization, I'd be into creating that. And they said, okay, let's do that. And so that's another of the sort of sayings of watch out what you ask for, you might get it. But decided to leave Lunar, which was hard since I co-founded the company with Jeff and Gerard. But it just seemed like, I remember telling myself, I'm young enough to make a big mistake. So, you know, what the fuck? So I made the move to Apple, which turned out to be a really great thing, and developed a number of really sort of very, very important products in sort of the trajectory of technology. And probably the most important one was the Macintosh PowerBook. And we had some challenges with the Macintosh relative to other operating system Windows at the time, in that Apple was entirely reliant on a pointing device, where at the time Windows machines and early Microsoft-based notebooks weren't. So we had to figure out what to do with this pointing device. And working with a really creative engineer, we found this sort of spot between the battery and the hard disk in the front of the computer, just put in a trackball, and immediately realized it's actually a really amazing ergonomic usage platform for a mobile product. We're creating a desk on your lap or wherever you worked. And it really revolutionized notebook computing. And what's crazy to me is still, you look at every notebook computer that's made today by anybody, and it uses this configuration, albeit, you know, substituted the trackpad for the trackball. But it became the dominant physical platform for mobile computing, and still is, really. So we then, we was building the team at Apple. We began to develop our own approach to design. At the time, we called the approach espresso because we drank a lot of coffee. But it was really moving away from being a little less rational, a little more emotional, introducing more curvature into the form, and sort of building this more expressive nature as a foundation for the products, and carry that forward for quite some time into a wide variety of things. And then we began to move into consumer products and highly mobile products. Here's one of the Newton products that we did. And, so began to sort of really build the foundation for Apple becoming a true consumer products company, which, I left about this time, recommended Johnny take over the team, which he did. And of course, the rest is history. I often joke that'll be my epitaph, the guy who hired Johnny Ive, which is fine. He's a great guy and an amazing person. So I'm proud to be associated with him. So at that was the time I left to go to Pentagram, and this were the first founding members of Pentagram, and the gentleman standing up in the middle, Colin Forbes, was an amazing man, and he really was the one who convinced me this was a great thing to do. And Pentagram was a really interesting model for me in that it's a worldwide company, offices, 5 offices all over the world, a high number of designers, maybe 200 people at the time, but really broken up into individual teams driven by individual partners. I often say it was like a law firm for designers in the way it was structured. So it allowed me to join something with a lot of gravity, but still run a fairly small team. But over time, that team grew, and eventually it became the largest team in the company. And I'm doing a lot of work with Fortune 500 companies, Hewlett Packard, Microsoft, Dell, Nike, all great work. But it was challenging because for the amount of work that we did, not a lot of it would get out to the market. It was sort of the nature of being an external consultant working for large corporations. And I was really not really happy about that. And the challenges of pushing great design through a corporate structure and culture was also something that was challenging as well. And I learned how to do it, but it was not fun. So this product came along, and this was actually a collaboration with a guy we'd done a project with a company called Zephyr Ventilation, who made kitchen range hoods. And we developed this concept originally as part of a video that was on the Discovery Channel about design. It was a barbecue, a sort of modernist barbecue called Fuego. Alex Xiao, the gentleman from Zephyr, saw it, said, let's start a company to make this. So he and I did that. And I really, at that point, I put on my entrepreneur hat and never looked back. And it was the way I really wanted to work. Either creating my own things or working with founders and small groups and creating things that hadn't been done before. And that really, set the stage for ammunition. And Karen already said some of this, so it's kind of our usual blurbs, but I'll explain what it means. A studio dedicated to putting talent at the center of imagining, creating, and operating new product service ventures. It's really, we view ourselves as, we work primarily with early stage companies or established companies that are doing something they haven't done before, and really take a very holistic look at not just the design of their things, but the creation of their business. And this is something that I really love and enjoy, and it's just become our sweet spot for what we do. Been in together since 2007. We work across a variety of disciplines of physical product design, digital product design, service, brand identity, user experience, graphic design, packaging. But it's not really a list of services. It's just that kind of stuff you need to do to get something out in the world and do it well. And that's really what we're about. Here's some shots. Some of you may have been to our studio in San Francisco. It's actually in a really great building. It was an engine house for the Beltline Railway on the waterfront in San Francisco that the Port of San Francisco owns, which we rented from day one. I've always been there, and it's a great spot in the city, and it's a really amazing environment, and just love being there. Miss being there every day. I'm going to run a little bit of a just ongoing slideshow, some of our portfolio stuff, which some of these I'm going to come back to and talk about specifically. But I'll talk a little bit about sort of what got me into industrial design, other than that faithful journey into the art building. And that as I discovered what industrial design was, I really became fascinated with the relationship that people have with things, with objects. And it's really, if we step back and look at it, it's really interesting. And in many ways, we define ourselves by the things we surround ourselves with. And of course, in the most acute way, your clothing, your shoes, but your car, your home, your phone, your laptop, all these things you choose, right? You have multiple choices, but you choose them for a reason that you identify with, and in some way they represent you. And that sort of relationship with objects really has always fascinated me, and I've always wanted to understand that relationship and obviously and honestly exploit that relationship that people have with things, and sort of to really help build things that people not only acquire to do something, but acquire because they desire it and want to be part of it and have that experience with it. And then developing the product in a way that sort of returns the favor, right? That as a reward for engaging with the product, you get a really great experience. And whether that's a tactical experience, a functional experience, an aesthetic experience, but just really creating things that people covet and enjoy and are delighted by. And that's really been the foundation of our work. It's sort of looking for those places where people can really enhance and as Karen said, sort of build things that matter, right? And build things that matter in people's lives, and that could be in small ways and big ways as well. So you've been seeing things we've done over the years and had a lot of ongoing relationships. I'll talk a lot about Beats because that's always a great story. But startups like Lark, this was a sleep monitoring device, more Beats stuff. We helped found this leather goods brand called Octovo, and as it was a promotional thing, we designed a series of surfboards, more Beats color. This was for UNICEF. It was a kid powered kids wearable that really helped with kids engaging to help do work to end hunger. Barnes and Noble e-readers, also did the first Amazon Kindle. This was a phone brand that we attempted to start called Object, pointing device, and for Adobe. This was a series of solar powered electronics we developed for a startup called Regen. And Williams-Sonoma, we've done cookware and pots and pans for that. We have a business relationship with Williams-Sonoma, and this stuff continues to sell after nearly a decade. It's crazy. So that's a little bit of background on ammunition. So I've got I think 4 or 5 different projects to show, but each one sort of comes under a subheading. Now with each one of these, I don't know if they're going to play or not. It's always a crapshoot. But behind each title, there's a little video, which you may or may not see. And I apologize if you just see a stagnant image, but like I said, Zoom and Keynote don't always work well together. So the first is this notion that technology enables, but design establishes. And this is something that I learned early on, and I think is really critical for people to understand. And it really goes under the notion of it doesn't matter how good it is if nobody gets it, right? And it's something I learned, that you could do this amazing piece of work, so beautiful, functional, but if someone doesn't really become engaged with it and understand how to use it or what it is, it won't matter, right? So technology can be a foundation of a great experience and incredible capability, but ultimately it's design that will establish it in people's lives. And really the companies that figured that out, of course, companies like Apple, but later on Google and Amazon and others, have the ones that have succeeded because they began to put design as a leg of that stool that makes them successful, along with marketing and engineering and manufacturing and all the things you need to do. That design is also part of it, because we can create this amazing technology, but if people can't get access to it, it doesn't matter. So the temptation always exists to create something that's never been seen before, which as designers we love to do that. But I found that many times people need an entry point that they can understand. Right. So if you create something entirely foreign that's never been done or seen before, that's really cool. But to the average person, that may be frightening because they have no idea how to relate to it or what that entry point is. So something that we've been doing in our work is, don't always replace, but always amplify, right? Always look at the what it needs to do and how it's going to do it, and build it off of that, and build these entry points for people to understand. So I'll start with a project that some of you may know, which is Ember, and this is a very typical model for ammunition, where we work closely with a founder and actually have invested in the company. It's something we've built as part of the company, where we not only work for these clients, we invest in them, and that actually, what we find is that actually makes us better designers and creates a better relationship. When we've got skin in the game, we're more attuned to the needs of the business and who they are, and they view us more as partners than sort of hired guns. And it's something we've developed and do as much as we can. So this is Clay Alexander, the founder of Ember. Clay is an amazing guy, just the sweetest person you'd ever meet. And I often refer to him as the Energizer Bunny. He has more energy than anyone I've ever met. But Clay is an inventor. He's a classic inventor. And one of the things prior to Ember he created was the first, some of the first LED light bulbs, which he sold his design to GE. And of course, they built an entire industry off that. What Clay had developed before founding Ember was this approach to heating and cooling using this material, which is called a phase change material. So essentially, it can heat and cool fairly efficiently and fairly quickly. And so he came to us and he had all these ideas for products he created. He really was into the idea of heated plates, right? That you could serve your meals on and they warm and keep your meal warm. And we thought that was cool, but it was a little problematic. You have to charge your plates, you have to make them dishwasher proof. There's a lot of stuff to deal with. So along the way, in brainstorming, we came along with Clay and a team up the idea, well, let's do a heated coffee mug, which is not new, but a very special heated coffee mug that can set and maintain a very specific temperature for your drink and hold it there. And it can heat or cool to achieve it. And that very simple idea turned out to be surprisingly powerful. What was really amazing to us was that you have this expectation when you have a cup of coffee that you take your first few sips, second, third sip, you sit it there, and your expectation is that it's going to get cooler. That's just what happens. But when you pour your cup of coffee or tea or whatever, and then pick it up 20 minutes later, and it's exactly the way it was, it's actually strangely satisfying. And we found that this simple product was really compelling. So we worked to design the first product was a travel mug. At the time, we were also doing work with Starbucks and working directly with Howard Schultz. And so I introduced Clay to Howard and ended up putting an Ember in all of Starbucks stores, which really launched the company. The second product that we did was more of a traditional coffee mug. It's actually ceramic coated mug that houses the battery and electronics and the phase change material. So very, very simple, very, very understandable. We removed the display, so you just set the temperature on the app, so you can keep simplified even further. Has its own charging base, which is in fact a coaster. And it's been an incredible success. And really, this is one of the ones where you can look back, and the relationship we had with the founder was what shaped this. And that was, again, something that started to drive us, was really being very close to founders. So there's more coming from Ember, more things where you can use controlled temperature. This one is about to come out, so I won't tell you exactly what it is, but if you have very small children, you'll be very interested in it. So next, craftsmanship. Craftsmanship is not something that I think is discussed in design enough anymore. And I don't want to start to sound like the guy that's been doing this forever complaining about younger generations. And it's not that. It's just that I think it's very easy to overlook the importance of craftsmanship in what we do as designers. And I believe design at its best is still a craft. And what I mean is, the discipline of design in all phases is an art. Done well, it's informed, evaluated, validated, and disciplined. And all the things that we do to really drive a consistent process towards consistent results. But at its heart, it's still a craft. Process is critical, but skill in everything, all aspects across that spectrum of process is crucial. The best work we do is impassioned and built upon iteration, refinement, and learning, and intuition and vision. And this is something I've discovered in this 40 years, is that the difference between good and great is many times care, pride, and commitment. Care, pride, and commitment to doing the right thing and doing the best possible work. Many times makes a difference between a product that's just good and something that's really amazing. So this is a project that's a new project that we launched not too long ago for a company called Gantry, and it's light from corn. So this is Ian Yang, another great founder that we work closely with. Ian started Gantry as a 3D printing company, but decided that he actually wanted to produce products and also create a marketplace and a place for designers to create products. So he started a lighting company called Gantry, and Gantry basically has a enormous number of 3D printing machines. This is a machine that they've developed their own that print these lighting structures out of a corn-based PLA material. So it's all it's incredibly sustainable, both in terms of the path of the material into it, but also in terms of waste and the amount of energy that's put into creating a particular product. So what Ian asked us to do was a couple of things. Originally to help, they were originally just doing desktop lamps. And so they work with a variety of designers in their marketplace, and they give them sort of some standardized componentry and a standardized approach to produce, so they can actually easily engineer and produce the products. And he wanted to expand those out of tabletop lighting into floor standing and wall lighting. But then we said, well, look, why not, as part of this, let's do our own collection. So we created a collection of lights built for Gantry under three families, and Carve, Geo, and Signal. And so this was the end output. This is the Carve light, which is very much a couple forms compiled together, but feeling very much like a monoform, as if it was carved out of a solid block. So we took that idea and extended it into wall lighting and floor lighting. Signal sort of comes from a little bit of a retro idea of the old single lights that were used in sort of World War II era Navy ships to communicate. Sort of taking that louvered idea and building it into something sort of fun and flexible that could be used in a variety of ways as well. And then Geo is sort of an homage to sort of early Italian lighting of the 70s, of this sort of very sort of soft and almost anthropomorphic assembly of forms. And so these were the concepts for Geo. The reason I wanted to do this project was I really wanted to begin to understand 3D printing as a production medium. It's obviously something we've used for quite a while in prototyping, but to really begin to understand this sort of approach and chain to move things out into the market using 3D printing technology, which was incredibly useful, and we're continuing to do more and more of. And so it's not going to replace many of the standard production methodologies we use today, such as forming or machining or molding, but it's another approach, which has pros and cons, but I think it's important to understand how it's used. So the next sort of learning is over the years of, and understand that art and commerce are not mutually exclusive. And it's, I think a lot of people tend to think that, there's art and business, right? And they're separate, but it's not true. It's culture is where they meet. And I think it's important to understand that arts are often overlooked or discounted, by business or technical communities, and sort of viewed as this separate thing with roots in culture and entertainment. But the truth is that art is decidedly a human pursuit. It's emotional at its foundation, and it provides a deep connection between people in the world at large. And this, this should matter to business and really be understood. Where this is most acute is popular culture, where the human condition and the things that that we want as human beings and want to be associated with can really drive exponential growth. And of course, this is in fact the story of Beats by Dr. Dre. So this is of course Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine, and I met them, it must be 14, maybe 15 years ago. Was introduced by someone else, and they wanted to produce products, audio products, but had never done anything like this. They were obviously, Jimmy being a highly influential and regarded music executive, former producer, and Dre, an artist and a quintessential producer, and really in many ways owned the sound of hip hop. And it you know, so it was really interesting. First of all, you know, to be working with these guys was great because, you know, went from, you know, sort of working with nerdy engineers to all of a sudden being thrust into this world. But I found their passion and their approach to be really amazing, and really something I'd never experienced before in a project or a development environment, where it was really very focused, very fluid, but incredibly exciting. So we went out and created this thing called Beats by Dr. Dre. And, you know, at the time, I remember thinking, you know, and this was something I invested in, right? That I really, we created a business relationship where we would really see a return on sales, which I realized later it was pretty much how they produce content. You know, if you're creating a piece of music, the artist gets a cut, the label gets a cut, the producer gets a cut. So it was really a very similar model. And honestly, I just like hoped to get my money back. I never really dreamed it would go anywhere. But, you know, the first thing we wanted to do was develop an over-ear noise canceling headphone. But the real important thing was that it was tuned for the genre of music that Jimmy and Dre were responsible for. I mean, they would say, look, we know how it's supposed to sound. We created it. So no headphones out there really reproduce the sound that we create. So that's what we want to do. So when I started to look at designing the headphone, I remember looking at what existed, and this is kind of a extreme version of it as a caricature, but most headphones tended to be driven by functionality. They tend to be very mechanical, really driven by durability, comfort, ergonomics, acoustics, of course, all the things that are super important, but they ended up being this sort of a very mechanical appendage as you put on your body. And I remember having a printout of the headphone like this and drawing a single line from ear to ear and thinking, you know, I just want to clean all that mess up, right? I want to simplify it and get it to a point where it actually looks good on the body, right? So that was how the first studio was created, from this sort of idea of pulling all this functional stuff together in a way that was much simpler and cleaner, and in fact would look good when you wore it. And that was the foundation of the brand and the foundation of the product idea. And we just began iterating on that idea. And so producing the Solo, the Pro, the Mixer, again, sort of continuing to expand and extend it, going into in-ear products, speaker products, and all the time just sort of building this brand and this ethos, which again was simple and beautiful and clean, but also emotional and something that you could connect with in a way that was very tactile, and that would again look good on your body. And so, you know, over the years, this really began to develop a very strong approach to design, and very recognizable and very understood in the market. Now, the thing I you know, I'm given a lot of credit for Beats' success, which is flattering, but really I always say this, it was really Jimmy, and really him understanding that his audience, a younger audience, really did not have a high performance audio brand that they could connect with and aspire to. And that's what he really wanted to do, was build this brand. And what he thought was, I'm you know, in the way that he promoted a music artist, he was going to promote the headphone and treat the headphone as the star. And so everything was big, right? And what really began to drive was this sort of notion of, you know, Beats as this sort of really ideal that you wanted to be associated with and be part of. And so part of that was that, you know, virtually everybody that came into Universal Music, Jimmy would put the headphone, put the product on, take photos of, and began to develop relationships with artists to really support the brand, and including Lady Gaga, losing my thought train for like Pharrell, a whole number of people that we were working with, and then began to move into sports, LeBron James, Serena Williams, Colin Kaepernick, and really began to exploit this relationship between performance and music, both artistic performance and athletic performance. And about this time, the company was acquired famously by Apple Computer, and originally I thought that was the end of it. We were going to move on. Apple was going to take over the design, but what it ended up is we ended up building a new relationship with Apple, and we continued to develop all the products, the latest including the Solo Pro, Power Beats Pro, which is an amazing exercise earphone if you've ever used one. It's a fantastic piece of ergonomic work. Beats Flex. And more recently, the Beats Studio Buds True Wireless. And the latest product we've introduced is the Beats Fit, which I'm particularly proud of because a lot of people within the company didn't think we could achieve this. And it's a wingtip design. You may not know what a wingtip is, but it is a soft, pliable piece that holds onto your ear and stabilizes the earphone. The challenge is it's one size fits all was thought to be impossible because every ear is different and every ear canal is different, even from side to side. And we managed to, through some research and development and a lot of iterations, sort of crack the code on a one size fits all ear tip. And these are incredible sounding, incredibly stable earbuds in your ear. And and we also hit a size range. You know, it's really impossible to get one that fits in everybody's ear, but we got the sort of unheard of percentage of successful fit on this product. So that's enough about Beats. Next thing, which I think this is a really important one to understand, and that's this notion of it's the idea, not the object. And it's funny coming from a person who sort of lives their life with objects and designing objects, which it's very important, right? Getting the physical thing right is important, but most successful products, when you step back and look at them, are really based on ideas, right? It's the thing behind the object, how it's embodied, what is it delivering, what's the promise, what's the premise, what is this idea that people have? And I often used to use an iPhone as an example. If you took your iPhone and took away the interface, took away the packaging, took away your Apple Store experience, took away the Apple brand, just took everything out other than the core industrial design, you'd have a beautiful object, but it wouldn't be an iPhone, right? So that's the sort of idea. If you remove the meaning behind them, what do you have? An object. So great products are about ideas, and their design should support this in the object and how it's represented and delivered in its use. So this is another study, which is one of my favorites, which is Square. So this is Jack Dorsey, of course, in his more clean-shaven days when we worked with him. And Jack, in addition to founding Twitter, had founded this company, Square. And Square was really about, at its core, democratizing the use of credit cards in small business, right? Prior to Square, to get up and running on taking Visa, MasterCard, American Express was complicated and expensive and took time. And Jack had this very simple idea of shortcutting all that and using the smartphone as a basis for taking credit card transaction. And before we met, he had, with someone else, developed this very simple reader where you just plugged it into your headphone jack and you could accept credit cards. Unfortunately, it was highly unreliable and kind of a pain in the ass to use. So our first project was to redesign the reader. Which we did with a lot of emphasis on building reliability into the product. But what we loved about it was this is their logo, the logo embodied in the product. So we kept that, but again, refined it, purified it, and continued to develop it. And then we were asked to work on this project called the Square Stand, which was essentially replacing the cash register. And what it would do is instead of using an iPhone, it would integrate with an iPad, but really become a point of sale register. And so as we began to do our research, it's a little bit of the kind of background and creative, really sort of understanding and building context what we're doing. We're sort of focusing on these two areas of efficiency and elegance, right? Sort of really building something which is low cost, simple setup, easy to use, et cetera. But then looking at retail and the kind of retail applications where this end up is really focusing on elegance and really a pride of ownership, and something that could literally sit on the counter instead of this ugly Casio cash register, something that was beautiful and sculptural that would in fact the owner would be proud of, and how that transaction would work and so forth. And so this is actually important because you go back to the credit card reader, out of that came this very interesting personal transaction where you hand your credit card to the merchant, he slides it through the reader, and then he or she gives the phone back to you, and then you sign and take it back. So there's this sort of passing back and forth of it. And so we wanted to bring that same sort of idea into the Square stand. So I don't know if this video will play, but it's a very simple thing where swipe the card, hand it back, and we put a swivel on the bottom so it could rotate around to the customer and they could sign their name and then swivel it back. So this very simple lazy Susan we felt was a really important part of this gesture of the Square experience at retail. And that was embodied in the final product, which this was one of those ones where the back view was the most important surface of the product. This is what, when someone enters, your coffee shop to buy a scone or Americano, this is what they see. And, and there have been successive iterations and they've changed the design a bit, but I still think this is probably one of the best looking retail products ever created for transactions. So last one here. Change is constant. Things never change. It's a little bit of a obvious conflict, but it is in fact the truth that we live in the world that is in a constant state of change, and it's really important to understand that and know what's going on and know what's going on around you, but also understand that things in many ways remain remarkably the same. Attitudes, interests, conditions, economics, culture, technology, politics, society, blah, blah, blah. They're all in a constant state of evolution, revolution, and flux. But our needs as humans remain relatively consistent. Health, shelter, sustenance, security, relationships, enjoyment, love. These are all things that people seek virtually every day of their lives. So I always feel it's very important to recognize change and grow and understand its effect on the core needs of the constituents you're working for as you design something. But also understand that you have to contextualize change with what is evergreen, right? And what is consistent, and understand basic human needs relative to that. Because it's very easy to think, oh, the world's entirely new, we're going to revolutionize everything, but then you're leaving people's needs in the dust, those needs that are core and consistent. So this is, Karen mentioned this project, which we just released very recently, called FEND. And it's really, for us, a very exciting and important project. It's another company that we invested in significantly and very timely. So FEND is about breathing, but really it's about your respiratory system and caring and maintaining your respiratory system, which of course through the pandemic we've all become much more acutely aware of. This is David Edwards. I just saw David yesterday. He's an amazing person. He's a Harvard, MIT trained scientist who, while working for the NIH on looking at ways that you could prevent the transmission of anthrax, developed an understanding of the importance of your upper respiratory airways. So sort of your airways between your nose and mouth and your lungs, and the importance of those airways remaining hydrated in terms of dealing with foreign material moving into your body, including viruses, bacteria, dust, pollen. That what he discovered was that if properly hydrated, your body acts as a very important filtering system for those foreign material moving into your body. So what happens is, when hydrated properly, your upper airways tend to capture particulate moving into your body, and then it's washed out into your stomach, where the acids in your stomach kill it. So it's this very efficient system for dealing with it. But what's happened with modern humans is we don't really take care of it. We deal with very dry air. We deal with situations where we are constantly bombarded with things that dry out your airways. So it's not something that's ever been paid attention to. But what he found through his research is that if properly maintained, it actually can be very effective. So they produced, actually not produced, but found an off-the-shelf mister that they could use their product. Now, the solution that's misted is actually a formulation of salts. It's entirely natural. What's really important in this is the droplet size, because if the droplets are too big, they get caught in your nose. If they're too small, they go through your airways into your lungs. So, but if they're just the right size, they get captured in your upper respiratory system and hydrated. So this was the first almost prototype short run they developed to test the system, and it worked. And they found through their research it could be literally as effective as wearing a cloth mask in terms of fighting viruses and other particles moving into your body. So what we were asked to was to develop a new version of this, and then also help them develop the company and the brand, the naming, everything about it. So just a little insight. These are my sketches. So this is how I work. I tend to do really quick 3D sketches, and I rely heavily on our CAD sculptors to develop them for me. But so these are my first, and I really actually liked going back to the prototype they had. I really like this hourglass shape. I think it's a very timeless shape. It's very pure. And it has some actually ergonomic affordances, which are really nice in terms of gripping it, and as well as gripping the top and the bottom when you compress it. So this is sort of my iteration in playing with this form, and eventually centered on this idea of this simple hourglass shape with this rubber belly band, which would flex when you compress it. So we literally squeeze it in a vertical way. Our 3D printers run like 24 hours a day, just prototyping. And so we've gone through a whole number of iterations of different ideas on how this could work, both functional and cosmetic. And this was the final concept or final design for the portable mister. So playing a little bit with finish. So here's a little video that shows what happens when you compress it. And it was one of those things where you don't need the little belly band, right? It'll work fine without it, but it's that sort of engagement piece and sort of getting back to, the thing that people loving objects, and sort of this idea that it just squishes and flexes in a way that actually is super endearing. And so it's just a little fun element that I personally was able to convince them to do. So as I mentioned, we also developed the identity, the mark, everything about it. This is the mark has to do with, of course, a water droplet and the letter F, and really we wanted to sort of give a feeling for the company that was less medical and more felt like somewhere between health and wellness and cosmetics, right? So it just we didn't want this at all ever to be seen in the same light as an inhaler, but more as something that you do for your health and well-being. And so that was really sort of the feeling and identity behind the company, and the packaging and everything. It sort of had that right sort of fit, more clinique than something medical. So that's Fend, and it's launched recently. It's been doing incredibly well. They're really starting to learn more about it, and actually finding some other things about it which are interesting. Is that the misting turns out to be very, very positive for athletes in terms of breathing. And what happens when you're working out is you dry your airways, not just from breathing, but you expel a large amount of moisture through when you exhale. So by fending before and after you work out, it's very helpful to your performance. Also, in terms of singing, artists and singers find that they have to keep themselves heavily hydrated to be able to keep their vocal cords operating effectively. This allows them to do that in a very much more efficient, regular way. So beginning to find more and more applications for the product. So I'm just about finished, and surprisingly, I've ended right on time. So a couple of closing thoughts here. I'm often asked about, what are the secrets? How do you become successful? What's the secret to doing really good design? And I always say this, there are no silver bullets, right? It's really about having skill, hard work, dedication, and always having an open mind. I think these are the things that you have to embody in your work every day as a designer to really be effective. And that's what will get you to that level. Something I like to talk about, which I think can be really important to you guys in this audience, is understanding tools and the tools that we use. We shape our tools, but our tools shape us, right? And what I find in using the tools that we use, the digital tools to create physical things, is that it's not always entirely clear whether we program them or they program us. I think it's a combination of both. And I always have to remind my team that we're creating things for an analog world, right? We were using an incredible digital process to get there, but in the end, we're creating things to live in an analog world, and to always keep that in mind as we're developing. And that's one reason we build so many models and do so much testing and prototyping, because it's always important to get out of the pixels and into the molecules. And that's something it's easy to forget. Last thing I'll say is always seek excellence, even if you're punished for it. And what I mean by that is that I found, as a designer, you're always under pressure to compromise, and compromise can be an important thing, right? You have to sort of manage. Sometimes you have to figure out how you can compromise to get this thing created and built and out into the world. There's always so much criteria that goes into producing something. It's challenging to do something perfect, but you have to have a core set of values, and you have to stick to those, even if you're punished for it. And what'll happen, and I'm using the word punish a little loosely, but what'll happen is if you do that, and even if you lose the battle, you'll be respected. So always seek the best result. And even if you don't achieve it, continue to push for it, because in the end, you'll either achieve it or you'll be respected for trying to get there. Wait, that's all. It's exactly 1 p.m. and this is the first time I've ever finished any lecture absolutely on time. So thank you all very much for listening and hopefully paying attention.
Thanks so much, Robert. We appreciate learning about your journey today and sharing your incredible work and putting this presentation together. So on behalf of Art Center, thank you so much. So we are going to close down now. I know that students do have class at 1. So thank you to everyone who joined today. And I just want to wish you all a wonderful day. Because we have to shut it down at 1, if you do have any questions, perhaps you can send me an email at careers@artcenter.edu, and we can compile those questions. Thank you all.
Yeah, I'll get them to Sarah and I'll be happy to answer. That'd be great.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robert.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.